Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. All right, so let's move on to item number 2, which is mine today. A kind of obscure discussion going on around the American Data and Privacy Protection Act, which had long been kind of stalled in committee because there were a lot of intractable disputes between Republicans and Democrats about this National Privacy Act and what was going to happen to state privacy laws and many other things. Now has moved out of committee based on some compromises that were struck. And that's a very, very big deal because most bills die in committee. So now that it's out of committee, there may be a floor vote and it may pass the House and it may get through the Senate because they've addressed some of the things that Rhea Cantwell, I think, was concerned about.
Despite targeting Chuck Schumer's biggest donors, I'm a little skeptical of that.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how that, and that's also true. That's also
but...
true of the antitrust legislation as well. Same issue. But at least it now has there's more of a chance that it'll get to a vote. Now, one of the things that I talked about on Wednesday that's important is that, among other things, it contains language about data collection and ad targeting. And there seem to be contradictory provisions in the act, where in one instance it says you need express consent, affirmative express consent, I forget the verbatim language, meaning opt-in. And in another, it talks about opt-out scenarios where people will be given the opportunity to opt out sort of globally or whatever. Those are two very, very different and very material dimensions to this. And the industry, of course, is lobbying for opt-out, right? There was a letter submitted to the committee about this should be an opt-out statute because that will allow the internet to still function based on advertising. If it's opt-in and people have to give consent to data being collected and ad targeting, we're going to see very, very low opt-in rates. I mean, the Apple, by analogy, the Apple opt-in rate is about, arguably, it's less than 25%. Depends on, there's ways to manipulate that number, but it's 75% of people said no. And if it's opt-out, then it's obviously going to be no change. Most people don't opt out. Most people don't know how to opt out. Often these companies make it very difficult to opt out. You're not confident when you're going through the motions that of what you're going to get. There's no confirmation of anything. CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, is an opt-out privacy law. Do not sell my data. I think that's had very, very little impact because it's just difficult to opt out. It's
And when you do opt out, like I have attempted with Google, you are continually nagged about opting in for photos or this.
Yeah, I said this before, but I think that opt out is itself intrinsically a dark pattern unless it's made so simple. Reject everything and you're done. One click and you're done. But that's not the way most of these things work. So ad choices for years, as an example, was an opportunity for you to opt out of behavioral targeting across the internet, and nobody did it basically. And that I think is an illustration of what would happen if this Privacy Act remains opt out, or if they come down on that side. I think it should be opt-in, especially given all the backdrop of all the data being used against you to prosecute you and to surveil you and all of that. I think we now need to move to an opt-in regime. Any disagreement with that?
No, I just would comment that you seem optimistic that our current form of government is capable of executing an opt-in deal, which I'm with David. I do not think, given the relationships and how they're driven, I see this as unlikely to be effective.
Well, you may be right, but let's just consider for a moment before we move to the Instagram discussion. Let's consider for a moment the sort of doomsday scenario that the industry repeatedly comes back to, that if they lose the opt-out provision, then the sky will fall in terms of ad-supported content. I don't think that that's true. I mean, I think you can do all kinds of things with contextual targeting and other.
Magazines have a very
Right.
long and successful career running demographically targeted ads based on their content, not laser focus.
Exactly. And there's evidence. There's some evidence that personalized advertising performs no better than contextual targeting, which
And Google still has localization, as does Apple, access to significant amounts of localization information, regardless. So Google would have both contextual and local information, which is really another whole problem.
For their own sites, but not an ad network. Not ads.
True.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, first parties would have to make the case. You'd have to make the case for location.
Right.
So that's already true on. I'm no longer an Android user, but that's already true on the iPhone. You have to opt into location sharing.
Right.
So, okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see first if what the final language is, and then whether it gets to a vote at all. So there's sort of two.
I'm optimistic about your optimism, Greg.
Well, so you got to be optimistic about something. The world is such a dreary place these days, and it's just like I don't want to give in to complete pessimism. So I'm hopeful, somewhat.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.